Imagine this. It's a beautiful day, and you show up at the airport excited to go on a family vacation. But then you find out your parents left your grandmother home alone. What would you do? Because that's precisely what happened to me. My parents and younger brother heartlessly left my grandma behind, even though she was the one who paid $20,000 to fund the luxurious trip to Hawaii. Why would they do something like that? Stay with me. Let me tell you what happened next. My name is Lily, and I'm 28 years old. I'm a software engineer at a startup in Denver. I chose this company because it gives me a stable income. Plus, they let me work remotely a few days a week. Right now, I live with my husband, Ray, and my 81-year-old grandmother, Amelia, in a 3-bedroom house in the suburbs of Denver, Colorado. The house was a gift from my grandmother to Ray and me. There's a small garden in the back where Grandma loves to grow flowers, and a wide front porch with rocking chairs where we often sit and drink coffee in the morning. Ray currently works part-time at a dental clinic downtown, but mostly takes care of Grandma. Watching him show so much love to Grandma fills me with gratitude. He often cooks meals Grandma loves, reads with her, and takes her to her regular checkups. A year ago, Grandma was living with my parents and younger brother, but after my parents excluded her from a family trip that she had paid for, Ray and I brought her to live with us. It was a heartbreaking story of betrayal and greed from my parents. The story I'm about to tell you happened about a year ago. It was a weekend in June 2024 on my grandmother's 80th birthday. The party was held at her house, the same house she had let my parents and younger brother Charles live in. We used to live in a small house in Aurora, but after the COVID-19 pandemic hit in 2020, my dad had to sell it to pay off some debts. After that, Grandma took them in to help them save on rent. That day's party had a warm and cozy vibe. It was just me, Ray, my parents, and Charles. We had birthday cake, celebrated Grandma, and everything felt genuinely joyful. I remember how she smiled as she blew out the candles, her eyes sparkling with happiness. After dinner, we were sitting in the living room having coffee when my dad suddenly said excitedly, "Mom, I think we should plan a family trip to Hawaii to celebrate your 80th birthday." Everyone lit up at the idea. Charles jumped in right away, shouting, "Awesome idea! It's going to be such a great memory." But then Grandma asked, "Who will pay for this trip?" My dad hesitated and said, "We're tight on money right now." Immediately, Charles smiled with a bright look and suggested, "Grandma, maybe you could sponsor the trip. It's a special occasion." Grandma went quiet momentarily before asking, "So, how much would a trip for the 6 of us cost?" Caught off guard, my dad pulled out his phone to look it up. About 10 minutes later, he answered, "Around $20,000 for all 6 of us. Flights, hotel, and activities." When I heard that number, Ray and I exchanged a worried glance. $20,000 was a massive amount for Grandma, who was already 80 and living on her retirement savings. What made me uneasy was how excited Charles and my parents seemed about it. Like 20 grand was no big deal. Meanwhile, Ray lowered his head, and I could tell he was just as uncomfortable as I was. As for Grandma, she stayed quiet for a moment, then smiled and said, "All right, I'll take care of it. If the family's happy, then I'm happy." A few moments later, she got up and walked into her bedroom. When she came back out, she had a check in her hand. She sat at the table and handed my dad a $20,000 check, saying, "This is for you to book the trip for the 6 of us. It's all of my savings." Hearing her say that was all she had saved up broke my heart. Everyone else was overjoyed, already making detailed plans for the trip. But Ray and I couldn't shake the feeling that it just didn't sit right, spending everything Grandma had like that. I watched her sitting there smiling so happily, and I never imagined that would be the last time I'd see her smile so genuinely for a long time. Ray and I couldn't sleep that night in our rented 2-bedroom apartment. We lay in bed staring at the ceiling, both weighed down by the thought of the entire family using Grandma's $20,000 savings for a vacation. In the dark, Ray spoke slowly. "I keep thinking about the look on her face when she said that was all her savings. She's 80 years old. That money might be all she has if something unexpected happens." After he shared what was on his mind, I turned toward him, looking at him in the faint light from the street lamp outside the window. After a pause, I let out a long sigh and said, "I feel the same. I'm ashamed I just sat there and didn't say anything. But if I had spoken up, Charles and my parents would have called me selfish, like I didn't want Grandma to be happy." Ray gently ran his hand across my cheek and said softly, "I think we should still go. If we don't, it'll break her heart." He was so excited about making happy memories with the whole family. Let her enjoy this trip. Hearing that, I reached for his hand and felt his warmth and understanding. An idea suddenly came to me, and I said, "Then after the trip, let's find a way to give her back at least $5,000 for Christmas." In the dark, Ray smiled and replied, "That's a great idea. We'll tell her it's a Christmas gift so she can buy whatever she wants." Even with a plan to return some of the money, I still felt uneasy. Something about how Charles and my parents reacted to that $20,000 didn't sit right with me. They accepted it way too easily, like it was nothing, like it was expected of her. I didn't know then that there was already a plan behind all their excitement. And just a few days later, our family would be split down the middle in a battle none of us saw coming. Ray and I stopped by Grandma's house 3 days later while running errands. My dad was sitting in the living room drinking coffee, and as soon as he saw us, he cheerfully announced that he had booked the tour for the whole family. The trip would happen in 10 days, and everyone was supposed to meet at the airport at 6 o'clock a.m. That's when he'd hand out the tickets. When I asked him to share the tickets beforehand so I could double-check the information, he said the travel agency hadn't sent them yet. His vague excuse didn't sit right with me. So I tried to ask for more details, like where we'd be staying and what the itinerary looked like, but his answers were just as fuzzy. A 4-star hotel near the beach and a bunch of fun activities, though he couldn't remember the specifics. Before I could ask any more questions, he suddenly said he had to meet a friend urgently, grabbed his car keys, and drove off, leaving me with doubts. After that strange and rushed exit, Ray tried to reassure me, saying I was probably overthinking things, that maybe Dad was just busy. I looked over at Grandma sitting in her rocking chair, her face glowing with pure happiness, and I couldn't bring myself to ask any more questions that might worry her. All I wanted was for everything to go smoothly, just like she hoped. But deep down, that uneasy feeling kept creeping in. I couldn't explain it, but something about how my dad acted, the vague answers, the way he avoided my questions, the way he left in such a hurry, made me feel like something was off. On the drive home, Ray held my hand and told me I might just be worrying too much. But my gut told me there was a secret, something I wasn't being told. And soon enough, I'd uncover a truth far more painful than anything I could have imagined. 10 days later, on the day of the trip, Ray and I arrived at Denver International Airport right at 6 o'clock a.m., just like Dad had told us. We rolled our suitcases toward the check-in area, excited to meet up with Grandma and get ready for our family's first trip to Hawaii. But when we got there, all I saw were my parents, Charles, and Harper, each with their luggage. Harper's presence surprised me. She's Charles's girlfriend, and nobody had mentioned she'd be joining the trip. Her large pink suitcase stood out, showing she was coming along. I looked around but didn't see Grandma anywhere. That uneasy feeling started creeping back in. I quickly asked, "Dad, where's Grandma?" He looked at me a bit awkward, then replied, "She got sick suddenly and couldn't come." I was stunned. Standing next to Charles, Harper looked uncomfortable when she saw my reaction. Seeing the doubt on my face, Dad explained, "I had to switch Grandma's ticket to Harper. Luckily, the travel company allowed the name change." That answer only made me more suspicious. I stared at him and asked, "Plane ticket changes usually take 24 to 48 hours to process. How could you change it if she only got sick suddenly?" Before Dad could answer, Charles jumped in. "Grandma's been sick for a few days now. She was the one who said to give her ticket to Harper." Something felt completely off. A few seconds later, I asked again, "Then why leave her home alone when she's sick? We could have rescheduled the trip, right?" That question made my parents exchange an uneasy glance. After a few seconds of silence, Mom finally spoke. She said, "Grandma insisted we go. She didn't want us to cancel the trip because she was worried everyone would be disappointed. She said she could care for herself, so we decided to proceed." Her answer sounded convincing on the surface, but I looked over at Ray and saw the same worried expression on his face as I had on mine. While the rest talked about check-in, Ray pulled me aside and whispered, "Something doesn't feel right. Let's check on Grandma. If she's okay taking care of herself, we can always book new tickets and fly out later." His reasoning made sense, and I nodded in agreement. There were too many red flags. Why had the ticket change gone through so quickly and smoothly? And more importantly, why hadn't anyone told us Grandma was sick? I returned to the group a few minutes later and announced, "We're not going. We're heading back to check on Grandma first." No one looked surprised. Dad said coldly, "Suit yourself." Right after that, Ray and I grabbed our bags and returned to the car. As we drove toward Grandma's house, I couldn't stop thinking about everything that had just happened. A voice whispered that I was about to uncover something I never wanted to know. And while I didn't know what was waiting for us, I knew for sure our choice that morning was the right one. We arrived at Grandma's house about an hour after leaving the airport. On the way there, I kept hoping I was overthinking things, that Grandma was sick, and this had all just been a misunderstanding. After a few rings of the doorbell, we heard slow footsteps approaching from inside. Grandma opened the door and her face looked completely normal. No signs of illness. As soon as she saw us, her eyes widened in surprise. "Why aren't you two on the trip? Isn't your flight around this time?" she asked. Hearing her question made my heart drop. Clearly, she was perfectly healthy, not even a hint of being unwell. I glanced at Ray, and his face mirrored the shock I felt. I explained that we decided to stay behind to take care of her because we were told she was sick. Grandma stood there silently for a moment. Then tears began rolling down her wrinkled cheeks. We moved into the living room, and she told us why she was home. She said my dad, Bennett, had told her to stay back. A week earlier, he told her the resort isn't really for elderly people. At that, I felt my blood start to boil, but she wasn't finished. She said he told her to stay home and take care of herself while the rest of the family went on the trip. In that moment, everything clicked. That's why Harper had her suitcase ready at the airport. It had all been planned. My mind raced with questions. How could my dad lie like that? How could he abandon the woman who gave him a place to live when he had nothing? A few minutes later, Ray suddenly stood up and said, "I'm going to make some coffee." He returned to the living room with a tense look and an envelope. "Take a look at this," he said. It was a confirmation letter for the Hawaii trip sent directly to Grandma's address. Ray had found it in the kitchen trash can. With shaky hands, I opened the envelope and read what was inside, and it hit me like a lightning bolt. The reservation listed only 4 names: Bennett Williams, Linda Williams, Charles Williams, and Harper Johnson. There was no mention of Grandma Amelia. No mention of me or Ray. The total cost was printed $13,740 for 4 people. It included round-trip airfare, 5 nights at a 4-star resort, and tourist activities. The truth hit me like a punch to the gut. We had never been included in the trip. Not only had my dad lied to Grandma about the resort being unsuitable for older adults, but he had also lied to Ray and me about us being part of the vacation at all. I handed the letter to Ray. His face went pale as he read it. Grandma looked at us worried. "What's going on, sweetheart?" she asked. I sat beside her, held her hand gently, and explained what the letter said. She sat quietly for a long time, then sighed deeply. To be sure, I pulled out my phone and called the resort directly. After being transferred to guest services, I asked about their age policy. The staff member on the line answered clearly. "We welcome guests of all ages, ma'am. We offer several special services for senior guests, and we're proud of that." When I hung up, the whole picture was crystal clear. Bennett, my father, my mom, Linda, and my brother Charles had planned to exclude Grandma and us from the trip from the beginning. They used her money, but only for themselves. And I realized something else. If I had stayed at the airport, Dad would have come up with some excuse about our names missing from the tickets or a travel agency error and told us to go home. Whatever story he chose, the result would have been the same. Only 4 people going on a luxury vacation with Grandma's money. Sitting in Grandma's living room, holding the confirmation letter, I felt like my world had collapsed. The father I had respected, despite our differences, had betrayed and lied to his aging mother in the cruelest way possible. Ray gently placed his hand on my shoulder while Grandma sat still, gazing out the window as if remembering a time when family meant something more than money and selfishness. That afternoon, while Ray was busy in the kitchen preparing lunch for Grandma, I sat on the old, worn-out sofa, letting childhood memories flood over me like a tidal wave. Since we were kids, Charles had always been favored. No question about it. He got all the expensive toys, remote-controlled robots, the latest handheld game consoles, high-end Lego sets. Me, I was the older sibling, so I got his hand-me-downs once he got bored. When I asked why I couldn't have new toys, my parents would say, "You're the big sister. You have to share." As we got older, the gap only widened. While I had to make do with an old laptop Dad bought secondhand from a coworker for $200, a slow, glitchy machine that froze constantly, Charles was gifted a brand new Dell laptop worth nearly $1,000. Dad's reasoning? Charles needs a good computer to study effectively. College was when the unfairness hit hard. I had to fight for scholarships and work part-time shifts at a coffee shop on weekends and nights to cover books and living expenses. Meanwhile, Charles had his car, a used Honda Civic worth nearly $4,000, and didn't have to work daily. My parents covered everything for him. The answer was always the same whenever I brought up how blatantly unfair it was, like a broken record. You're the older sister. You should give way. Or, don't compete with your little brother. One time when I finally lost my patience and asked them directly why they treated us so differently, my mother looked me in the eye and said, "Charles isn't as strong as you. That's why we have to take more care of him." Sitting in the living room that day, clutching the confirmation letter from the travel agency, one question kept echoing in my head like a knife turning in a wound. When will this favoritism toward Charles ever end? And what made it worse, what made it truly unforgivable, was that even Grandma, the one who had taken them in and supported them when they had nothing, had been lied to and cast aside just so Charles and his girlfriend could enjoy a free vacation. That was the moment I realized in my family, this favoritism wasn't just a phase, it was a pattern, one that would probably never stop. Ray's voice calling us for lunch pulled me out of the storm of painful thoughts. I got up from the sofa, feeling like my whole body had grown heavier from the weight of everything we just uncovered. The three of us sat around the table in complete silence. Ray had made a simple lunch, warm soup and sandwiches, but none of us had the appetite for it. Every few minutes, Grandma would let out a quiet sigh, her eyes drifting toward the window like she was searching for answers to something she still couldn't fully grasp. Inside me was a mess of emotions. Anger at my father and Charles, blended with heartbreak, the kind that comes when you realize that the people you once loved and respected are capable of something so cruel. They hadn't just lied to Grandma, they had stolen from her. They had taken away what might have been her last real chance to make a beautiful memory with the people she believed were her family. I looked at Grandma sitting across from me. She looked noticeably older than she had just a few hours ago. The lines on her face seemed deeper, the weight on her shoulders heavier, and I couldn't stop myself from wondering, did she ever imagine that the son she raised and protected all her life would be the one to betray her like this? Now and then, Ray would glance at me, with eyes full of quiet concern. He could tell I was barely keeping it together. He knew this wasn't just about a canceled trip. This was about years of injustice, favoritism, and being pushed aside while others were lifted. In the stillness of that small kitchen, the only sounds were the soft clinks of spoons against bowls and the steady rhythm of Grandma's sighs. Faint little sounds that somehow carried more weight than any words could. They were the sound of a grief too deep to speak. At 3:00 p.m. that day, while the three of us sat in the living room still trying to process the painful truths we'd uncovered, Ray pulled out his phone to check his messages. Suddenly, a frown spread across his face. He turned the screen toward me and said, "Look at this." It was a photo Charles had just posted on Instagram. In the picture, the four of them, Dad, Mom, Charles, and Harper, were all grinning ear to ear by the resort pool in Hawaii. They were dressed in bright, colorful swimsuits, cocktails in hand, looking relaxed and carefree. Charles had captioned it, "Family Vacation in Paradise." The second I saw the photo, fury surged like a volcanic eruption. My hands trembled as I grabbed the phone, my blood boiling. They were out there having the time of their lives, soaking up luxury, all on Grandma's dime while she sat here with tears in her eyes, heartbroken and betrayed. The sense of being lied to, dismissed, and betrayed, all at once twisted into a storm of emotions inside me. I couldn't believe they could be so heartless. Not just to steal, but to flaunt it for the world to see. With a voice full of resolve, I turned to Ray and said, "I'm going to sue them for fraud. They took Grandma's money under the pretense of a 6-person trip, but only brought 4. That's clear deception." Ray nodded in agreement, but Grandma walked into the living room from the kitchen before he could respond. Her face no longer looked sad. It was calm, composed, and marked by a kind of steel determination I'd never seen in her before. She looked into my eyes and said coldly, unwavering, No need to sue them, Lily. I have my way of handling this. The way she said it sent a chill down my spine. In all the years I'd known her, I had never heard Grandma speak like that. Her tone was firm, even icy, with a quiet anger simmering just beneath the surface. I looked at her stunned and asked, "What will you do?" She gave a faint, mysterious smile, but her eyes remained hard as ice. "Trust me," she said. "Those who betray their own family will pay a price." I didn't yet understand what Grandma meant, but from how she spoke, I knew one thing for sure. The people who thought they could deceive and discard her were about to face consequences they never saw coming. After Grandma sat down with Ray and me on the sofa, she stayed quiet momentarily, as if deep in thought. Then she looked me straight in the eye and began reciting a phone number without hesitation or pause. Once she finished, she told me firmly, "Call that number." I was taken aback. Grandma rarely remembered phone numbers. She usually had to dig through her old address book or ask me to find a contact on her phone. But this time, she spoke with complete clarity, like she'd had that number memorized for years. I didn't question it. I just did what she asked. I dialed and waited. After 3 rings, a calm and professional voice answered, "Aura Peterson Law Office, how can I help you?" I cleared my throat and said, "Hi, my grandmother, Amelia Williams, asked me to call this number." The moment I said her name, everything changed.